The ghost of her husband's last words still clung to the air in her mind, 24 hours after the ink had dried on the divorce papers. "You're just too much, Jordan. You take up too much space." Preston had said it with the casual cruelty of a man swatting a fly, his eyes already distant, already fixed on the delicate, bird-boned silhouette of his new life. Tonight, that ghost was a bitter wine on her tongue. Jordan moved through the plush, hushed interior of Seoul, the exclusive rooftop restaurant where she was the head sommelier. Here, she did not take up space. She commanded it. Her body, full and generous in a bespoke black dress that skimmed her curves with authority, moved with the unhurried grace of an expert in her own domain. The clink of crystal, the murmur of discreet wealth, the scent of seared scallops and old money. This was her armor. She was presenting a 1982 Petrus to a tech billionaire when she felt the shift in the room's atmosphere. It was a subtle drop in temperature, a tightening of the air, as if a predator had just entered the territory. Jordan finished her spiel, her voice a low, steady melody, and turned. He was seated at the corner table, the one with the panoramic view of the Los Angeles skyline, a throne disguised as a dinner reservation. He had not been there moments before. Men like him did not simply arrive, they materialized. He wore a custom Tom Ford suit, the color of a midnight storm, tailored so precisely it seemed fused to his frame. His hands, unadorned except for a simple, heavy platinum ring on his right pinky, rested on the table. They were still, but it was the stillness of a coiled snake. Jordan's training took over. She approached, her professional smile a perfect, impenetrable mask. "Good evening, sir. My name is Jordan. May I recommend a wine for you tonight?" His eyes lifted to hers. They were dark, sharp, and intelligent, holding a chilling lack of sentiment. A thin, white scar bisected his left eyebrow, the only flaw in a face carved from unforgiving granite. He didn't smile. He simply watched her, his gaze an assessment. "I will wait," he said. His voice was a low baritone, laced with an accent that was clean, precise, and unmistakably Korean. Before she could respond, a new sound cut through the restaurant's curated calm. A braying laugh, loud and obnoxious. Jordan's blood ran cold. She knew that laugh. Preston. He stood at the entrance, his arm draped possessively around a willowy blonde in a dress that cost more than a car. His new fiancée. He scanned the room with the entitled air of a man who believed he owned any space he entered, and his eyes landed on Jordan. A smirk, cruel and triumphant, spread across his face. He steered his companion directly toward the corner of the room, near the man in the Tom Ford suit, near Jordan. Well, Preston said, his voice loud enough to turn heads. "Look at this. Working hard, I see. Gotta pay for all that space, I suppose." Jordan's spine went rigid. She refused to give him the satisfaction of a reaction. "Preston, enjoy your evening." The blonde giggled, a vapid, tinkling sound. "Oh, Preston, is this her? The one you told me about?" "The very same," he said, his eyes raking over Jordan's body with theatrical disdain. He took a deliberate step closer, invading her personal space. Still pouring drinks. Some things never change. He reached out and grabbed her arm, his fingers digging into her skin. "Maybe you can pour us a free one. For old time's sake." The pressure was humiliating, a public branding. Jordan's composure, the armor she had so carefully constructed, began to crack. She opened her mouth to tell him to let go, to call for security, but a voice, quiet and cold as the grave, sliced through the tension. "Remove your hand." It was the man at the corner table. Kwon Jin-woo. He hadn't moved. He hadn't raised his voice. But the command had the force of a physical blow. Every person at the surrounding tables fell silent. Preston turned, his face a mask of blustering indignation. "Excuse me? Who the hell do you think you are?" Jin-woo slowly placed his napkin on the table. He rose from his chair, not quickly, but with a deliberate, fluid motion that was more menacing than any sudden movement. He was taller than he appeared sitting down, his shoulders broad beneath the expensive fabric. He moved like the room owed him space. "I am the man telling you to unhand the lady," Jinwoo said, his eyes locked on Preston's. "You have 3 seconds before I break your wrist." There was no anger in his voice. It was a statement of fact, as calm and certain as a surgeon describing a procedure. Preston, for all his bluster, was a coward. He saw something in Jinwoo's eyes, a promise of absolute, efficient violence, and his bravado crumbled. He snatched his hand back from Jordan's arm as if he'd been burned. "Whatever," Preston stammered, grabbing his fiancée's arm. "Let's go. This place has gone downhill." He practically fled, dragging the blonde behind him. The silence he left in his wake was profound. Jordan stood frozen, the phantom pressure of Preston's fingers still burning on her skin. She looked at the man who had intervened. He was watching her, his expression unchanged. "My apologies for the interruption to your evening," she said, her voice strained but professional. He inclined his head slightly. "There is no need to apologize for the poor behavior of lesser men." He gestured back to his chair.
"Now."
"About the wine. I have a private event tomorrow. A sensitive gathering. I require a sommelier. You will be compensated at 5 times your usual rate." Jordan stared at him. It wasn't a question. It was a directive. "Sir, I'm not available for private hire on such short notice." "You are now," he said, his gaze unwavering. "My driver will be waiting for you downstairs when your shift ends. Do not be late." He picked up his menu. A clear dismissal. The incident was over. A transaction had been made. She should have refused. She should have called a manager, called security, walked away. But she didn't. She looked at the faint red marks on her arm where Preston had grabbed her, and then at the absolute, unshakable stillness of the man who had made him disappear with 2 sentences. For the first time since the divorce, the ghost of Preston's voice faded, replaced by a terrifying, magnetic silence. That was the moment everything changed. The estate was a fortress of glass and steel nestled in the Hollywood Hills, a monument to cold, hard power. Armed guards, dressed in the same severe black suits as their employer, patrolled the perimeter with the silent efficiency of specters. Jordan was led through vast, minimalist rooms decorated with museum-quality Korean art and furniture, so sparse it felt more like a gallery than a home. The air was climate-controlled and smelled faintly of cedar and ozone. Her job was simple, yet surreal. For hours, she poured wine for a dozen men who spoke in low, hushed Korean. They were Jinwoo's lieutenants, his inner circle. She understood nothing of their words, but she understood the language of their bodies. They deferred to him with a mixture of fear and reverence that was absolute. He was not a boss, he was a king. And this was his court. When the meeting concluded and the men had dispersed, Jinwoo found her in the cavernous wine cellar, conducting a final inventory. "Your work is exemplary," he stated, observing her as she made notes in a leather-bound ledger. "It's my job," she replied, not looking up. She was trying to maintain a professional distance, a futile effort in a house where the walls seemed to have eyes. "My organization, the Golden Dragon Syndicate, values expertise," he said the name of his enterprise without inflection, as if commenting on the weather. The truth of who he was laid bare. He was Yakuza. Korean Mafia. The kind of man people whispered about in fear. Jordan finally met his gaze. "And what does your organization do, exactly?" A flicker of something, amusement, perhaps, crossed his features. "We manage assets. We resolve conflicts. We maintain a certain order." It was the most elegant description of organized crime she had ever heard. She felt a chill that had nothing to do with the temperature of the cellar. She had a chance, right then, to feign ignorance, to finish her work and leave. But her curiosity, a trait Preston had always called a flaw, got the better of her. "This house, it doesn't feel like a home," she said, the words escaping before she could stop them. He didn't answer immediately. He walked over to a small, private section of the cellar, where a single type of wine was stored, a rare, sweet rice wine from Jeju Island. He ran his fingers over the label of one of the bottles. "It wasn't always this way," he said, his voice softer than she had ever heard it. He gestured for her to follow him, leading her out of the cellar and up a spiral staircase to a part of the house she hadn't seen. He opened a door to a small, soundproofed room. Inside was a single grand piano and a floor-to-ceiling window overlooking a secluded garden of cherry blossom trees, currently bare in the winter air. On the piano, there was a framed photograph. It was a woman. She was beautiful, with a wide, joyful smile and eyes that seemed to dance. She was sitting at this very piano, her hands poised over the keys. Her name was Jin. Jin Woo said, his back to Jordan as he stared at the photograph. She was a concert pianist. She believed music could heal any wound. Jordan remained silent, sensing she was treading on sacred ground. This was his vulnerability, the one crack in the granite facade. She filled this house with music, with life, he continued, his voice flat with memory. She used to say it was too quiet, too cold. She said I lived like a ghost in my own home, he paused. 5 years ago, a rival faction, the Red Vipers, wanted to send me a message. They knew I was meeting with a politician to secure a new port contract. They knew I had doubled my personal security. They determined that the easiest way to wound an empire is to kill its heart. He turned to face Jordan, and for the first time, she saw something beyond the cold calculation in his eyes. It was a deep, ancient pain. The shame of a man who could control a city but could not protect the one person who mattered. She was on her way to a charity recital. They ran her car off the road. It was not an accident. It was a statement. I had underestimated their depravity. A fatal miscalculation. The silence that followed was heavy with the ghost of a symphony cut short. He had lost a woman he loved because of who he was. Jordan saw it then. The coldness of the house wasn't a choice. It was a memorial. It was a tomb. Later that night, as his driver was preparing to take her home, one of Jin Woo's men, an older man with kind eyes named Mr. Park, stopped her at the door. He has not spoken of her to anyone in 5 years, the old man said quietly. Be careful. Being seen with him makes you a target. The Red Vipers are still his sworn enemies. They are snakes who prefer to bite at the ankles. He offered her an envelope thick with cash and a burner phone. A car can take you to the airport. A new life, a new name. No one will find you. You should go. It was an exit. A clean break. The smart, sensible thing to do. She could take the money and disappear, forget the man with the scar and the ghost in his eyes. She could run. But as she stood at the threshold of that cold, silent fortress, she thought of Jin's joyful smile. She thought of Jin Woo's quiet, devastating grief. And she thought of Preston's dismissive cruelty. She pushed the envelope back into Mr. Park's hands. I haven't submitted my final invoice, she said, the lie tasting like ash on her tongue. She told herself it was professionalism. She told herself it was about getting paid what she was owed. She was lying to herself. She stayed. She made a deliberate choice to stay, when she could have left. She found him in the music room, standing before the window, looking out at the barren cherry trees. He knew she had been offered a way out. He knew she had refused. The silence between them was not empty. It was charged with her decision, with the weight of what she was stepping into. She believed there was good in everyone, he said, his gaze still fixed on the garden. Maybe she was right, Jordan whispered. He finally turned to look at her, his eyes dark and intense. They were standing so close, she could feel the heat radiating from his body, could smell the faint, clean scent of his cologne, something with notes of bergamot and smoke. No, he said, his voice a low rasp. She was wrong. There is no good. There is only strength and weakness, and the will to protect what is yours. His gaze dropped to her lips for a fraction of a second, a flicker of heat in the cold. It was the first charged moment between them, a silent acknowledgement that this was no longer a business transaction. It was something far more dangerous. The retaliation was not swift or violent. It was surgical. The Red Vipers, true to their name, did not strike at Jin Woo directly. They struck at Jordan. 2 days after she'd made the choice to stay, the owner of Seal called her into his office. His face was pale, his hands trembling. A case of Screaming Eagle Cabernet, worth $250,000, had vanished from the cellar. The security footage from that night had been wiped, but the digital access log showed her keycard had been the last one used. She was fired. Not just fired, but disgraced. The word spread through the tight-knit community of LA's elite restaurants and cellars. Jordan, the consummate professional, was now a pariah, a thief. Her professional life, the world she had built as her fortress, was dismantled in a single afternoon. Her past was being systematically erased. She knew who was behind it. Jin-woo knew, too. He didn't offer apologies or platitudes. He offered a solution. "They are testing me," he said, his voice dangerously calm. They were in the back of his armored Escalade, gliding silently through the neon-drenched streets of Koreatown. "They perceive you as a weakness. We will show them they are mistaken." His plan was audacious. The leader of the Red Vipers, a man named Kenji Tanaka, was a collector of rare Japanese whiskeys. He was also notoriously paranoid, conducting all his sensitive business through a server kept in a vault beneath a private art gallery he owned. That gallery was hosting an exclusive, invitation-only auction. "I cannot get in," Jin-woo said. "But you can." That night, Jordan found herself dressed in a shimmering, gunmetal gray gown, her hair swept up, a diamond necklace, a loan from Jin-woo's private collection, cold against her skin. She looked like the kind of woman who belonged in these circles. Using her former credentials and a skillfully forged invitation, she walked into the auction on the arm of Mr. Park, who was posing as a wealthy collector. Her role was to cause a distraction, a significant one. At the peak of the auction, as a bottle of 1960 Karazawa was up for bid, Jordan stood up. "This is a fraud," she announced, her voice ringing with an authority she did not feel. The room fell silent. All eyes turned to her. "The vintage you are presenting is a counterfeit. A very good one, but a fake nonetheless. The color is off by a single shade. The seal has been tampered with." It was a complete and utter lie. A fabrication born from hours of studying photographs Jin-woo's Intel team had procured. But she delivered it with the unshakable confidence of an expert. Tanaka's face contorted with rage. Chaos erupted. In the confusion, Jin-woo's hacker, a young man who had slipped in disguised as a waiter, had the 30 seconds he needed to access the server room and plant a device. Jordan had crossed a line. She had used her gift, her reputation, or what was left of it, to commit a morally gray act, potentially destroying the career of the auctioneer, an innocent man caught in the crossfire. She couldn't uncross that line. The consequences were immediate. As she and Mr. Park were making their exit, two of Tanaka's enforcers moved to intercept them in the parking garage. But before they could reach them, a black sedan screeched around the corner. The window rolled down and Jin-woo was there, his face a mask of cold fury. Gunfire erupted. It was not the loud, chaotic sound from movies, but a series of suppressed, efficient pops. The two enforcers crumpled to the ground. Jin-woo threw open the passenger door. "Get in. Now." Jordan didn't hesitate. She scrambled into the car as tires squealed, and they sped out of the garage, a hail of bullets pinging off the armored plating. He shoved her down, covering her body with his own as the rear window spiderwebbed with cracks. The scent of gunpowder and his cologne filled her senses. In the adrenaline-fueled chaos, his body a solid, living shield over hers, she felt a terrifying sense of safety. He had almost lost her. They found refuge in a nondescript industrial warehouse he owned downtown. The adrenaline ebbed, leaving behind a tremor in her hands and the sick weight of what she had done. She leaned against a cold metal support beam, wrapping her arms around herself. He came to stand before her, his suit jacket gone, his white shirt stark in the dim light. He saw the conflict in her eyes. "You regret it," he stated. "I ruined a man's reputation tonight," she whispered. "He did nothing wrong. He worked for a monster. In my world, there are no innocent bystanders. There is only what keeps the people you value alive." He reached out, his movements slow, deliberate. He brushed a stray curl from her face, his thumb grazing her cheekbone. The touch was electric, a jolt of heat against her cold skin. It was fleeting, almost involuntary. "You are the first person in 5 years," he said, his voice a low, rough confession, "who has made me feel anything other than cold." It wasn't a declaration of love. It was something more honest, more dangerous. It was an admission of a vulnerability she now embodied. The proof of that vulnerability was waiting for her when she was finally escorted back to her apartment at dawn. Left on her doorstep, coiled neatly on the welcome mat, was a dead viper. Its fangs were bared, a silent, chilling message. The red vipers were done testing him. They had found his weakness. And now, they were targeting her directly. The dead snake was not a threat, it was a promise. Jinwoo moved her into his fortress that same day. Her apartment, her old life, was declared a compromised territory. She now lived in the cold, beautiful house with the ghost of a concert pianist. But the house was different with her in it. She filled the silence not with music, but with her presence. A presence Preston had called too much, but in these vast, empty rooms, it felt essential. The data from the hacker's device revealed Tanaka's plan. He was consolidating power, preparing for a final, decisive strike against the Golden Dragons by ambushing a shipment of his. The intel included a location, a massive, climate-controlled wine storage facility near the port, and a time. It also included a piece of bait, a credible, high-level communication indicating that they had captured Jinwoo's new woman. "It's a trap," Jinwoo said, his voice flat as he stared at the schematics of the warehouse on a screen. "He will expect me to come for you." "And you will," Jordan said. It wasn't a question. Yes, his eyes met hers, dark and absolute. "He is correct in his assessment. I will." But Jordan was looking at the schematics, her mind, trained to see patterns in vintages and terroirs, seeing something else. She saw vulnerabilities. She saw pathways. "He expects you to come in through the front or the roof, with force," she said, pointing to a section of the blueprint. "But he doesn't know what I know." She pointed to the fire suppression system details. "That's a halon gas system. Standard for a facility storing irreplaceable assets. It displaces oxygen to suffocate a fire without using water. If someone were to trigger it, it would create total chaos. Zero visibility. It would incapacitate anyone not prepared." She then pointed to the ventilation shafts. "And I know the precise temperature and humidity controls for a warehouse like this. I know which vents lead to which sectors." She was no longer just the bait. She was the strategist. The final confrontation was a symphony of controlled violence. Jinwoo's team went in, a silent, deadly force, expecting a frontal assault. But the real first strike came from within. Jordan, who had been smuggled into a neighboring facility, navigated the ventilation system, a feat only possible because of her intimate knowledge of such places. She emerged in the control room, a ghost in the machine. She triggered the halon system. Dense, white gas flooded the main floor. The red vipers were thrown into confusion, choking, their vision obscured. It was the opening Jinwoo's men needed. They moved through the chaos with night vision goggles, their movements precise and lethal, while their enemies stumbled blindly. Jinwoo found Tanaka himself. The fight was brutal, short, and ended with the unmistakable sound of a final, sharp crack. It was over. In the quiet aftermath, as the gas slowly cleared, Jinwoo walked through the warehouse littered with his defeated enemies. He found Jordan by the control panel, her face smudged with dirt, her breathing still ragged. She had not been rescued. She had been a decisive actor in their victory. One of his most trusted men, Mr. Park, was being helped out, a grim look on his face and his arm held at a painful angle. This world always demanded a cost. Her old life was gone, and his people still bled for him. Nothing was free. Jinwoo stopped in front of her. He looked at her, and the coldness in his eyes was gone, replaced by something she couldn't name. It was not gratitude. It was recognition. "Hygiene saw the good in people," he said, his voice low in the echoing silence of the warehouse. It was a beautiful, but fatal, flaw. He took a step closer, his presence filling her world. "You," he said, "see the truth. The flaws. The vulnerabilities. And you do not run from it. He reached out and gently brushed the smudge of dirt from her cheek. He said her name, Jordan, and it sounded different from anyone else. It was not a name. It was a claim. You belong with me. They drove away from the port, leaving the cleanup to his soldiers. The city lights of Los Angeles streaked past the armored windows of the Escalade, a river of fractured diamonds. Jordan looked at her reflection in the dark glass. The woman staring back was not the same one who had been dismissed and discarded just days ago. Then she looked at him. He was not looking at the road. He was watching her, his expression intense, unwavering. Preston had thought she was too much. He had been a fool, measuring her worth in the small, cramped space of his own ego. In this sprawling, violent empire of shadows and secrets, her presence wasn't a liability. It was a strength. For the first time in so long, she felt like she was exactly the right size. She would not go back to her old life. She couldn't. A cost had been paid. Her past was the price of her future. She made the choice, the final, conscious choice to stay. Without a word, she reached across the leather console and placed her hand on his. His fingers immediately closed around hers, a firm, possessive grip. It was not a tender gesture. It was a pact, sealed in silence as they drove deeper into the heart of the night, into the center of his world, which was now, irrevocably, hers.